Okay, so what's all this about anyway? This Network Plus, transforming education systems for sustainable development. Well, the name, part of it, of course, is in the title, that we're interested in systemic change. We're interested in transforming education systems. We recognize, on the one hand, that in many parts of the low-income world, the middle-income world, and indeed all around the world, there is a learning crisis. And this is reflected in learning outcomes at different levels of the system, but also in terms of access to different parts of the education system. So many governments in Africa and Asia are struggling with dealing with more than 12 million young children of school-going age who are not in education at all, but also with the fact that the vast majority of those do not even reach basic thresholds of competency in mathematics and literacy. But there are also issues that are also part of the same wicked problem, if you like, that whilst there is this learning crisis and there are difficulties of access to a good quality education, what we understand by a good quality education is also increasingly being put under the spotlight. To what extent is education relevant to the lives of young people? To what extent can it equip young people, parents, the communities with the capabilities to transform the world that they live in order to address problems of unsustainable development? And this really is the wicked problem at the heart of what our Network Plus is seeking to achieve. We have a shared vision, and the vision is that whilst we believe education can make a difference, we realize that it can only do so if education systems are themselves radically transformed. It's consistent with global, regional, and national agendas in that we believe passionately in the idea of lifelong learning, which is important, but also in developing the transformative agency required to meet the challenges of environmentally sustainable and socially just development. So we have particular principles that we're working from of equitable partnership based on a common ethical framework. And part of putting together the proposal for the Network Plus was to try and elucidate what those principles are. We're also committed to an idea of transdisciplinary knowledge co-production. And let me just take a moment and stand back and see if I can explain what we mean by that. It's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially, people approach issues of sustainable development from different positions in society, whether they're policymakers, whether they're people living in rural areas, living in slums in cities, whether they're school-going children or people of an older age group. And people come at these issues with very different perspectives and interests. People working in the private sector, in NGOs, as well as in government. So a transdisciplinary perspective aims to bring those different interest groups together with their different values and visions of what sustainable development entails. But tackling a wicked problem, such as the one that I've described, how you go about transforming education systems, also requires interdisciplinary understanding. We have in our team people not only from education, but people who have been working for years in the area of sustainable cities, from geography, the discipline of geography, people from economics, working on developmental economics, because of course, developing sustainable economies is a key part of what we expect education systems to do. People from health, but also people who are climate scientists. We have climate scientists in our advisory group, people with expertise of getting people involved in processes of social learning to mitigate issues of climate change. But of course, reaching the most marginalized means dealing with different kinds of inequalities in education. We have in our advisory group expertise in the area, for example, of indigenous knowledge systems. We have some excellent colleagues Hassan Kaya Mayashri Chimsami from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who are specialists in this area and have worked across the African continent to not only assist indigenous people, but actually, more importantly, to understand that within indigenous communities is a tremendous resource about how to manage the effects of unsustainable development. Because, of course, indigenous communities have been dealing with issues of development, sustainable development, for many centuries, long before Western science was even conceived. These resources are often undervalued, and we want to draw on them in our project. But of course, underlying much of the issues are issues of poverty, and we have in our advisory group specialists in poverty, Professor Dave Gordon from the School of Policy Studies, who specialises in policy, for example. And we also have people who are concerned with gender, because it's often women, not only just women, but women living in rural areas, women who are at the sharp end of different kinds of oppression as well, who are also at the sharp end of unsustainable development. And we want to embed a concern with gender into the heart of what we're doing. So we have some gender specialists as well in our advisory group. Professor Fatuma Chege, for example, from Kenya, and also Joan DeJager from the University of Minnesota. So we want to make sure that we address those cross-cutting issues. Well, our aims as a network are threefold. We want to develop, on the one hand, capacity to undertake this kind of research. And we're really committed here to Southern-led research. Part of our commitment to knowledge co-production is involving people who aren't usually involved in the research process directly in the research process, because we want to not only tap their expertise, but also their energy and their commitment to making a change in their communities. And in that sense, you know, we need to learn from different kinds of groups. But we also want to build the capacity in southern universities and research institutes and NGOs to undertake this kind of research. And part of what we'll be doing is around capacity development, which we understand as multi-directional, not just north-south, but south-north as well, and south-south. But we also want to give out half of our money, we will be giving out half of our money, to projects, as Bruce suggested before, that will actually hopefully generate new knowledge around how education can contribute to sustainable development. So we want to co-produce the evidence and arguments urgently needed to transform education and training systems so they become genuine drivers of socially and environmentally just development. Okay, so at the outset, we have three particular areas that we're interested in relating education to. And in a moment, our partners will talk a little bit more about some of those areas and challenges in each of their countries. But essentially, we're looking at the relationship between education on the one hand, economic growth and development on the other, although, of course, the whole idea of economic growth is one that we've been problematizing in our Network Plus. But then also issues of climate action and of responsible consumption and production and sustainable cities and communities. So within those very broad parameters, we're looking to fund a range of research projects that we hope will help to make a difference. So 50% of our funding will be used to fund those kinds of projects. And a bit later on, Tara will invite you will explain a little bit more about how you might get involved or potentially get involved, think about getting involved in the research yourselves if you're interested. Okay, we have a range of key outputs, traditional outputs, but also we hope very practical outputs, whether they're in the world of formal schooling, whether they can be used by communities to support processes of sustainable development in communities. We're also going to produce MOOCs, and our partners in India are experts at that. So a bit later on, Tara will explain to you more about how you can get involved. But at this stage, I want to hand over to our country partners to talk about issues of sustainable development in their own countries and how education systems are or aren't responding. So first up is India. Right, okay. So Professor Batra, over to you.